Spiritual author Patricia Sanchez decided that she wanted a true definition of wisdom, so she decided to interview teenagers. Now, this is a true story. She was an author and a professor, and she thought she might get a fresh perspective on the nature of wisdom. So when she asked a 14-year-old boy, "What does it mean to be wise?" he replied, "Knowing something." When pressed, "But what is wisdom?" he said, "Well, okay, knowing a lot of something." A 13-year-old, when asked the difference between being smart and wise, said a smart person knows a lot of facts, but a wise person has knowledge that comes from experience. And a 9-year-old simply said, a wise person knows how to make the right choices. The question about what constitutes wisdom has been on our minds lately as we wrap up our political season. As I record this homily, we don't yet know the outcome of our national election, so many are on pins and needles awaiting the outcome. Now, our readings today don't deal with politics and elections, but rather with the end times, the parousia, the second coming of Christ. And in that light, the message is simple and straightforward, as described by the 9-year-old. A wise person knows how to make the right choices. So let's explore today's gospel parable, which comes to us as an allegory about wisdom. 10 young women went out to meet the bridegroom. Now, it might help to understand a bit of background about first-century Jewish wedding customs. The ceremony and the feast took place in the groom's compound, at his house or at his father's house. But the celebration began with the groom going off to the bride's house to bring her home. And this took a variable amount of time. A wedding in the first century was a contract, a combining of families, and there were negotiations that had to be completed. Now, in the meantime, young women, siblings or cousins of the groom typically, prepared to welcome the bride and groom to the feast by forming a welcoming party along the path home. So in today's parable, 10 young women went out to meet the groom. They're described as 5 wise and 5 foolish. The wise ones brought along extra oil. The foolish did not. Wisdom, making the right choices, obviously means being prepared. Now, our gospel today unfortunately ends with the admonition to stay awake, which really isn't the point, because in the parable, both the wise and the foolish women fell asleep. It isn't the sleeping that's the problem here. It's the preparedness for the coming of the groom. And in a very similar way, we too are wise when we are prepared. What then is foolishness? Did the foolish not notice that the 5 women alongside of them had a reserve of oil? Did they fail to take note that some of the women seemed more prepared than they? Now, maybe this is the first sign of foolishness, not noticing others around us and believing that events are centered around ourselves and our own needs. This has been a tough year for all of us, a year of stress, grief, and displacement. If your experience has been anything like mine, you might find that your world has grown smaller than before, without the ability to go out and enjoy our neighborhood or our city, with entertainment and sports and other activities shut down. I find myself spending a lot of time within the 4 walls of my home. And there, it becomes easy to focus on my predicament, my problems, the things that I've been denied in 2020. But as the days get shorter, we can't let ourselves lose sight of those in need around us. And here I have a special appeal. For the past several years, we've helped out the kids from St. Mary of the Lake and St. Thomas of Canterbury in the Uptown neighborhood. We've done that through the Giving Tree Project. You might have seen the trees in the back of church in previous years. We collected hats, gloves, scarves, mittens, and warm socks. Well, with COVID, it's simply not safe to collect warm clothes this year. But we can still support these communities who have been devastated by the health and economic effects of COVID. So our plan for this year is to support them with a monetary donation. Check out our webpage at standrew.org/givingtree to donate through November 23rd. Through your generous donation, you can make Christmas a little warmer for these kids. And we thank you for your support. But back to the question. What then is foolishness? Perhaps the foolish have squandered the gifts they've been given, just like they squandered their limited supply of oil. For them, the announcement that the bridegroom is near fills them with dread. But you and I, we have a dilemma here. Because in this parable, we might feel that the wise virgins were rather selfish. After all, they refused to share their oil with the foolish ladies in such a critical situation. But we're not really talking about lamps and oil in this parable, but instead we're talking about people and life. And there are certain things that you simply cannot borrow or inherit. We can learn from one another. We can be inspired by one another. But in the final analysis, we shape our own destiny. Character cannot be transferred or borrowed. We have to build it for ourselves. And the same is true of our faith. Maybe what it means to be foolish in God's eyes is to demand from the wise and prudent what we neglected to cultivate on our own. Or maybe what makes us foolish before our merciful God is our unwillingness to admit a fault or confess a sin. Were the foolish women simply too scared to wait humbly and admit to the groom when he neared that they had packed inappropriately? Perhaps that is the height of our foolishness, to think that our transgressions are greater than God's mercy. What would have happened if the foolish virgins would have waited for the Lord to arrive? Wouldn't he have forgiven them for their oversight, for their lack of full preparation, and still welcomed them into the feast? Isn't it the same for us? After all, when we go to communion, don't we pray, "Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word, and my soul will be healed." No matter our transgressions, the Lord forgives. So if this is foolishness, what then is wisdom? A wise person lives each day in the light of Jesus. Wise people find themselves in the most ordinary experiences, and that's where they see Jesus. They see Jesus in the people they meet, in the situations in which they meet them, in the events that take place in their lives. Jesus is no stranger to them. And while he may bring many surprises, he is never unexpected. This parable about the parousia of Christ has nothing to say about calculating the end. We know not the date or time, but it has a lot to say about living in readiness. The deepest wisdom, in the fullest readiness, it turns out, is to live mindfully, honestly, and nonviolently. It means that we live to meet our neighbor's basic needs, to use our gifts for the good of all, and to admit when we're wrong. As the wise 9-year-old said, a wise person knows how to make the right choices. And when the bridegroom comes, place yourself among the wise and be prepared with full jugs of oil. God bless.